I walked into the funeral parlor with the weight of damp air still clinging to my coat, signed the condolence book, the ballpoint clicking once sharp as a hammer against silence. My mother sat near the front wrapped in her black scarf, her hands knotted tight. Behind me, voices murmured low, blurred. Then my husband leaned close, his breath grazing my ear, the words colder than the November rain outside. I'm leaving. Back to her. 15 years carved out in one whisper, erased without tremor. I froze, pen heavy in my hand, the letters of my own name smearing, as though they did not belong to me anymore. In my purse, the phone vibrated, an alert from the bank, withdrawal successful. My stomach turned, but my face stayed still. I adjusted the frame of my father's photo, smoothed the cloth beneath it, anything to keep from breaking in front of the mourners. He walked away without looking back, shoulders squared as if the room were his to leave. I felt the ground slip, but no tears came, only a strange, clear calm. The click of the pen echoed again in my head, not as a mistake, but as a mark. That night I promised myself one thing: I would not beg for anyone to stay. I had told myself for months that exhaustion explained everything, that grief over my father's illness had clouded my eyes, that the distance between us at home was temporary, like a draft sneaking under a door. I wanted to believe his late nights were the cost of sales calls, that his phone turning face down on the table was politeness, not secrecy. I wanted to believe the shift in his voice, the new sharpness when he said, "Don't wait up," was just stress. The truth was scattered across small objects, each one whispering a story I refused to read. The first was a parking stub I found on the floor mat of his car when I vacuumed before taking my mother to physical therapy. The address, printed in faded ink, was a building on the riverfront, a place with loft apartments and cafes I had never been to. He said he had stayed late with a client, but the stub said midnight, not evening. I folded it and slipped it into my wallet, telling myself I was being paranoid, telling myself I was only tired. The second came in the form of a shirt that smelled faintly of detergent we never used. My mother is allergic to fragrances, so our house has always smelled plain, like warm cotton or nothing at all. But that shirt carried an ocean breeze scent, the kind that lingers too long and clings to skin. When I asked why, he shrugged and said the laundromat had used a different soap. He never took clothes to laundromats. I let the lie settle, afraid to press it, because pressing meant opening a wound I wasn't ready to see. The third was his sudden taste for silence. We used to sit at the kitchen table, him peeling an apple, me pouring coffee, trading notes about bills and errands. Lately, he filled the space with television noise or slipped outside for phone calls. His eyes darted away when I asked simple questions. Work, he would mutter, already halfway out the door. And still I tried to patch the holes with ordinary things: extra cinnamon in his oatmeal, clean sheets, his favorite beer chilled in the fridge. Each effort landed on cold stone. Then came the withdrawals, small, regular, unnoticed until they weren't. $20 here, $40 there, cash vanishing like water seeping through cracks. At first I thought he was paying for gas or lunches, but the pattern became clear. Late nights matched the missing money, the slips aligned with the silent hours. I told myself not to look at the bank account too closely, that it was intrusive. But the morning after my father died, I couldn't deny it. The lawyer's call made everything echo with sharp clarity. The account is empty, empty like the hollow in my chest when he whispered at the wake. Before that night, I had already lived with loneliness inside my marriage. There were weekends when he chose company retreats instead of family dinners, birthdays, when his gift was a hurried card signed in the car. I excused it, reminding myself that middle age was heavy on everyone, that maybe I was no longer enough to pull his attention. I should have known that the emptiness wasn't an accident, but a pattern. I thought back to the way he recoiled when I reached for his hand in the pew at church, how he pulled away as if my touch burned. I thought about the way he avoided the sound of my laughter, his mouth tightening as though joy had become a burden. And yet I clung to hope, because hope is easier than starting over at 50. My mother moved in with us after her surgery, and I told myself that his irritability was only because of the crowded house, the hospital bills, the constant shuffle of caretaking. I tried to believe he was just tired of being surrounded by grief, that maybe he was drowning too. I ignored the smell of perfume that lingered on his jacket one night, a sharp floral scent that wasn't mine, wasn't anyone in our house. I hung the jacket in the closet and shut the door as if silence could erase the evidence. I ignored the way he flinched when I mentioned his college sweetheart during a family story, how his fork froze midair and his eyes turned to glass. I ignored, and in ignoring, I betrayed myself. At the wake, when he whispered those words, all the ignored fragments crashed together, every stub, every scent, every withdrawal forming a single picture. The picture wasn't sudden, it had been there all along, growing darker while I looked away. I thought about the nights I sat up waiting for him with coffee growing cold, the meals I reheated twice before throwing them out, the birthdays I spent with my mother instead of with him. I thought about how he had left me alone even when he was in the same room, his eyes fixed on a screen while I spoke into air. And still, I had convinced myself that loyalty meant endurance, that staying meant strength. But in that moment, pen pressed against the condolence book, I knew endurance had only made me blind. What haunted me most was not that he left, but that he had already been gone for years, slipping away, while I tied my life tighter to his. My father's watch ticked on the table each second, striking against the quiet, each tick asking me if I could see clearly now. The answer was yes. I saw that betrayal does not arrive in one grand gesture, but in 1,000 small silences, each one a nail in the coffin of trust. I saw that my fear of starting over had chained me to someone who was already gone. I saw that love cannot survive on denial, that grief cannot excuse cruelty. That night after the wake, I sat alone in the kitchen. The house smelled of lilies and damp wool, the candles still burning low. I wrote every sign down in a notebook, every stub, every scent, every word unsaid, forcing myself to acknowledge them. My handwriting shook, but it was mine. I clicked the pen once the sound sharp and final and underlined the last entry he left before he spoke it. The morning after the call from the lawyer, the house was too still, as if grief had swallowed even the hum of the refrigerator. Rain tapped the kitchen window in uneven drops, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth carried in on shoes from the wake. My mother slept in her chair, a blanket tucked around her knees, her breathing soft but fragile. I stood at the counter with a mug of coffee untouched, the steam fading before I could bring it to my lips. The silence was not ordinary. It was heavy, a silence that asked questions I had avoided for years. My father's watch lay on the table where I had set it down the night before, its second hand stumbling, ticking half a beat late, a reminder that even time itself had gone crooked. I reached for it, turning it in my palm, listening to the irregular rhythm. Each tick matched the hollow in my chest. I thought of the withdrawals, the perfume, the late nights, the whispered confession at the wake. The weight of all those small betrayals pressed on me, but so did another truth: I was still here. I poured the coffee into the sink, rinsing the mug as if washing away something spoiled. The faucet hissed and the echo filled the room, startling in its normalcy. I looked at the notebook where I had written every sign, the ink smudged in places from my unsteady hand. My eyes caught the last line again. He left before he spoke it. The words were blunt, but I felt steadier seeing them on paper. I pressed the pen until it clicked the sound sharp in the emptiness and wrote the time of the lawyer's call beneath it. For the first time, I admitted what I had resisted: he was not coming back, and I would not ask him to. A question surfaced, quiet but insistent, like the rain against the window. Who was I without his shadow in my house? The answer did not come, but the asking felt like breath returning. I set the watch back on the table, straightened the notebook, and pulled the curtain aside. Outside, the sky was gray, the river swollen, the neighborhood hushed. Somewhere in that muted morning, a decision began to form, not spoken, not complete, but alive. I began the day with the same routine, but everything inside me had shifted. The lawyer's voice still echoed in my ears, each word about the emptied account striking like the toll of a bell. I brewed coffee and set 2 cups on the counter out of habit, then slid one back into the cabinet with a hollow laugh. My mother was awake now, shuffling softly in her slippers, asking if I had slept. I told her yes, though the circles beneath my eyes betrayed me. I pulled the notebook closer and began to write, cataloging each fragment of evidence, as if lining stones across a path I had no choice but to walk. The parking stub, the perfumed shirt, the closed-off voice, the hidden withdrawals, and finally the whisper at my father's wake. Each entry bled into the next until the page seemed to carry its own pulse, I clicked the pen sharply, the sound cutting through the stillness, and felt steadier, knowing I was collecting the truth in order no longer scattering it in denial. After breakfast, I called the bank. The woman on the line spoke gently at first, but her voice tightened when she saw the pattern of withdrawals, several in the same hour, all routed through an ATM near the riverfront apartments. She advised me to come in person, bring identification, and file a dispute. I hung up and pressed my forehead against the cool kitchen window pane. The glass fogged blurred the outline of the trees outside, and for a moment, I thought about the years I had blurred the outline of my own marriage, refusing to see its true shape. By mid-morning, I was in the bank lobby, the carpet muffling my steps, the air too cold from overworked air conditioning. I handed over my ID-signed forms with my unsteady hand and listened as the manager explained the account could be frozen pending investigation. My signature scratched across the paper, my name anchoring itself where his had once sat beside mine. I realized how strange it felt to see my own name alone. The manager mentioned surveillance footage at the ATM, suggested I contact the police if necessary, and handed me a copy of the dispute. The pages felt heavy as stone in my hands, but they were mine, proof that I was no longer looking away. I carried the papers home in a manila folder, tucked under my arm like a shield. At home, my mother dozed in her chair, and I placed the folder beside my father's watch on the table. The watch ticked unevenly. The papers rustled faintly, and between the two, I felt the weight of both past and present pressing against me. I opened the folder again and traced the signatures with my finger. The ink was still drying slightly, raised against my skin, proof that this time I had acted, not ignored. By afternoon, exhaustion caught me. I sank into the couch, notebook in my lap, pen balanced between my fingers. My phone buzzed with a message from him. Don't make a scene. We can be adults about this. The words drained me more than they enraged me. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. I clicked the pen once, twice, then wrote beneath the last entry in my notebook. He wants silence, but I have paper. That evening I called the lawyer, the same one who had phoned in a panic that morning. His tone steadied when I explained the bank had frozen the account, that I had filed a formal dispute. He reminded me gently that the inheritance from my father was separate property, untouchable, and I felt a breath loosen in my chest. He suggested documenting every conversation, every withdrawal, every message. Paper, he said, is stronger than whispers. I thanked him, hung up, and sat in the dim kitchen, the single light bulb casting long shadows on the wall. I thought about the years of excuses I had made. He's stressed, he's tired, I'm demanding too much, and how each excuse had been a brick in the cage I lived in. Now, piece by piece, I was dismantling it. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I opened the closet where his jacket still hung. The perfume still lingered faintly, though days had passed. I pressed my nose to the fabric, once not out of longing, but to remind myself of the lie it carried. I let the sleeve fall and closed the door gently, as though sealing the memory inside wood and air. In my room, I laid the folder, the notebook, and the watch on the dresser, lining them neatly like a ritual. The pen rested across the notebook, its plastic body reflecting the thin light. I lay down, but could not sleep. My mind rehearsing the next steps: meet the lawyer in person, secure my inheritance, file for separation. Each thought felt terrifying, yet each one made me feel less like a shadow. Sometime before dawn, I rose and walked back to the kitchen. The window was dark, reflecting my own face faintly. I saw the tired lines, the hollowness beneath my eyes, but also the steadiness in the way my mouth no longer trembled. I brewed coffee again, poured a cup, and sat at the table. My mother stirred in her chair, murmuring my father's name in her sleep. I touched the watch and listened to its faltering tick. It no longer sounded broken to me, it sounded alive, imperfect, but moving forward. I picked up the pen, clicked it once, and wrote the date across a fresh page. Beneath it, I wrote, "The day I stopped making excuses." And for the first time in years, the silence in the house did not frighten me. It felt like room being cleared, space being made for something unbroken. The night of the burial, when the house was heavy with leftover casseroles and wilting flowers, I gathered everyone in the dining room. My mother sat at the end of the table, her scarf still looped tight around her shoulders, her eyes dull from grief. My aunt placed a hand on her arm, steadying her. Across from them, my daughter appeared on the laptop screen, her face pixelated but bright with concern. Two close friends stood near the doorway, their silence respectful. I placed a folder in the center of the table and did not sit. My husband shifted in his chair, restless, his hand tapping against the wood as if he could drum away the truth. I opened the folder without ceremony. Bank statements slid out pages, showing withdrawals stacked one after another, each line a wound carved at 2 a.m. Beside them, I laid the receipt for an Airbnb near the riverfront, paid with the card that once belonged to both of us. Then I set down the note from the lawyer confirming my inheritance was not marital property, that no one could touch it but me. The room was so still I could hear the clock in the hallway tick. I spoke only a few sentences. I told them the account was empty because of his choices. I told them my father's final gift to me, his savings, his watch, would remain untouched, safe. I told them I would not live in a house where betrayal was repackaged as maturity. He started to speak words tumbling fast, excuses, protests, attempts to sound reasonable. My mother raised her hand gently, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Enough." My daughter's eyes filled on the screen not with confusion but with recognition, as if she had already seen the cracks long before I admitted them. My friends did not move, but their presence was enough anchors in a storm. I reached for my father's watch, wound it once until the tick steadied, then slipped it into my pocket. I pulled the ring from my finger, feeling its groove one last time, and set it down beside the folder. The sound was small but final. My husband stared at it, his face draining of color, his hand frozen above the table. I did not argue, did not cry. I simply said, "This ends tonight." The words were not shouted. They were quiet, but they filled the room more than his voice ever had. I closed the folder, slid it back under my arm, and walked to the doorway. Behind me, the silence was absolute, broken only by the tick of the hallway clock, steady, relentless, refusing to pause for anyone. The morning after that confrontation, I woke with a strange clarity, as though my body had finally caught up to the decision my mind had already made. The air in the bedroom was cool, heavy, with the faint smell of rain drifting through the cracked window. His side of the bed was empty, the sheets untouched, and I realized it no longer mattered where he had gone. I sat up, pulled the folder of documents onto my lap, and began sorting them again, this time, not with trembling hands but with the precision of someone drawing a map. Each page was a landmark: the bank statements, the Airbnb receipt, the lawyer's confirmation, even the printout of our joint account balance now frozen at 0. They were no longer just pieces of paper. They were proof that I was not imagining, that I was not hysterical, that my reality was solid and undeniable. I dressed in silence and drove downtown to the attorney's office, the rain streaking down the windshield in long, steady lines. Inside the office, the walls smelled faintly of old books and coffee. The attorney listened as I explained again what had happened, nodding with the calm patience of someone who had seen lives crack apart before. He advised filing for a legal separation, immediately securing my father's inheritance under my name alone, and submitting a formal claim for the funds siphoned from our joint account. His words were measured, almost gentle, but they carried the weight of finality. When he handed me the draft of the petition, my name stood alone at the top of the page, not tethered to his. I signed without hesitation. The sound of the pen, scratching across the paper, echoed in my ears, firmer than the click I had used to mark my notebook. Walking out of the building, I felt the rain on my face, cold and cleansing, as if the city itself were rinsing me clean. At home, I gathered the remnants of his present shirts still hanging in the closet, shoes lined neatly by the door, the coffee mug he favored with its chipped rim. I placed them into boxes without ceremony, stacking each one by the front hallway. The silence of the house shifted as I worked, no longer suffocating, but open like a room airing out after years of being shut. My mother watched from her chair, her eyes following me quietly, and when I set the last box down, she simply nodded. No words were needed. That evening he returned. He stopped short when he saw the boxes, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. He started to speak, but I raised my hand. "It's done," I said, my voice steady, low. "The papers are filed. The account is frozen. My father's inheritance is protected. You can collect what's yours and leave." His mouth opened and closed, searching for words, but none of them mattered anymore. He carried the boxes out one by one, the sound of the door opening and shutting marking the rhythm of his departure. With each thud of cardboard on the porch, the house grew lighter. When the last box was gone, I closed the door softly behind him. I did not slam it. I let the latch catch in its own time, a quiet, dignified ending. I stood for a long moment in the hallway, listening to the silence. It was no longer filled with suspicion, no longer heavy with secrets. It was mine. I walked to the kitchen, set my father's watch on the table, and wound it until the second hand ticked true. The sound filled the room, steady and alive. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down with the notebook, and wrote a single line across the page. Today, the house became mine again. And for the first time in years, I believed the words. The days that followed unfolded with an unfamiliar calm, as if the walls of the house were learning how to breathe again. Each morning, I rose before the sun, brewed coffee, and let the aroma settle into the quiet kitchen. My mother's chair creaked softly as she shifted beneath her blanket, and I felt a strange steadiness in being able to care for her without the shadow of his absence looming over every decision. I laced up my shoes and began to walk along the river before work, the air crisp, the water swollen from recent rains. Other women walked there too, their faces lined with years but softened by the rhythm of shared movement. One morning, a woman with gray streaks in her hair matched my pace and asked if I wanted to join their Saturday 5K. I said yes, surprising myself, and the invitation felt like a door swinging open. At the funeral home, I arranged flowers, set out coffee for grieving families, and found myself listening more closely than I ever had before. Their sorrow mirrored mine, yet in comforting them, I began to find fragments of comfort for myself. The notebook stayed with me, its pages filled with evidence, now giving way to new entries. The smell of rain on my morning walks, the sound of laughter from my coworkers, the taste of apple pie my daughter baked when she visited home for the weekend. Each note was a reminder that life still offered small certainties untouched by betrayal. At night, I wound my father's watch, the tick, steady, now no longer faltering. The sound was no longer a reminder of time lost, but of time continuing. Sometimes I sat at the kitchen table with the curtains open, watching the streetlights glow against the pavement, and felt no urge to fill the silence. It belonged to me, and that was enough. My hand touched the groove where my ring had once been, and instead of pain, I felt relief. The weight that had pressed against me for years was gone, and in its place was space to breathe, to move, to remember who I was, before I shrank myself to fit his indifference. I ended each day by writing one question in my notebook, simple and unadorned: what do I want now? The answers came slowly, not always complete, but the asking itself became a form of healing. And as the weeks passed, I began to see that freedom did not arrive all at once, but in quiet increments, as steady as the tick of the watch on the table beside me. In the weeks that stretched into months, the house no longer felt like a place abandoned, but like a place reclaimed. I cleared the closets, repainted the living room in a pale shade my mother liked, and opened windows to let in air that had been missing for years. The silence, once suffocating, became a companion, a quiet reminder that I was still here, still moving forward. Healing did not come in a single moment. It arrived in fragments like light seeping through blinds at dawn. Some mornings, it was the steady rhythm of my father's watch ticking true on the table, a sound that no longer spoke of what I had lost, but of what I still carried. Some afternoons, it was laughter with my coworkers standing in the break room sharing pie, the kind of ordinary joy I had forgotten to notice. Some evenings, it was the river walk, my breath keeping time with women who had their own scars, none of us needing to explain why we kept moving. I began to see that dignity was not about winning or proving him wrong. It was about refusing to let betrayal define the rest of my days. My father's inheritance was safe, but more than that, I had inherited his steadiness, his way of facing life without theatrics, just with resolve. The notebook that once held proof of deceit now held small promises to myself. Plant a garden in spring, teach my daughter the recipes my mother taught me, laugh more often, trust my own silence. I no longer measured my worth against his absence. I measured it against my ability to stand, to breathe, to choose. Betrayal had hollowed me, but it had also carved a space wide enough to fill with something better. Tonight, I sit at the table, the watch ticking beside me, the notebook open to a blank page. I write only one line: I am home. And for the first time in years, the words feel like truth.